Twitch. Boom, we're on to Twitch, and I'm gonna skip doing Kick tonight, because fuck Kick. Alright, I meant to get to this so much earlier today. Weird day, busy day. Weird day. But we're near the end of it. I got my teammate, that's this yo-yo action I'm doing back here. What time is it? 5:57. Alright, yeah. Oh, I'm hoping to do like at least 3, maybe 5 chapters a day, but this might be it. Just the one. Garrett sifted through the wet sand, searching for any splinter of his shattered salvage worth reclaiming. Chad did pop something in ChatGPT to give me a quick critique. Great, I won't critique the whole chapter yet. I'll handle exactly what you're asking for. Clean, precise, line by line, annotated markup for trimming. This final paragraph only showing what to cut, what, why. No, goddammit. No. Whole chapter review. That's why I loaded the whole chapter. Fuck, ChatGPT can be dumb as shit sometimes. Alright. Let that process, and then, why are you being slow? Being slow as fuck. Yeah. Twitch while I'm at it. See, Garrett sifted through the wet sand, searching for any splinter of his shattered salvage worth reclaiming. I don't hate that sentence. The rain came down in thin, needling sheets. I ain't mad at that either. Turning the beach into a slurry of grit and foam. Behind him, he felt the presence. Behind him, he felt the presence. Angry splashes breaking the gray water. The weight of distant eyes watching from beyond the breakers. Days before, he would have strained to see her through such a storm. Now he fought just as hard to ignore her. With his escape ruined, he retreated into the forest. Into a place that he felt his, not hers. So, the rain came down in thin, needling sheets. Turning the beach, and then I have the sun hung low and bruised. Well, it doesn't work. Low and bruised. Behind a cloudy veil. The canopy above, dripping ceaselessly. He reached his familiar fishing spot faster than usual, driven by bitterness that lengthened his stride. He thought of his ruined traps and wondered darkly, spitefully, whether she had dragged herself ashore just to destroy them, to ensure his reliance on her offerings. Well, why is that a separate sentence? It doesn't make any sense. Just to destroy them, to ensure his reliance on her offerings, to toy with him, to sing that sweet, twisting melody and wind it around his soul only to drown it in depravity. The thought made his stomach turn. Desire clung to him still, warm and shameful beneath the cold rain. He hated her, despised her, yet he hungered for her. Hungered to hear that intoxicating, sorrow-laden song again and kiss away whatever loneliness had birthed it. And beneath all that, a simple hunger gnawed at him. Simpler hunger gnawed at him. He had seen the fresh catch of fish strewn among the wreckage on the shore. A larger haul than usual, a gift, a taunt. He ignored it out of spite, knowing full well she would see his rejection. Now he wished he had stolen some of that fish away before slipping into the woods like a starving stray mongrel. The rain only sharpened the scent of the creek as he knelt beside it, watching silver-backed fish driftily laze in the shallows. His stomach knotted and growled. Rage simmered at the thought of waiting yet again for one to take the pitiful bait he'd offered for days without success. In the dim, overcast light, he caught his reflection rippling on the water. Wild brown hair matted to his skull. Streaming in tangled strips. A rough layer of stubble clawing across his jaw, naked, soaked, alone, half-starved. He looked less like a shipwrecked sailor and more like a madman haunting the forest. A barbarian. The world made something harden inside him. The word made something harden inside him. Right then he decided he would carve out a new shelter here, far from the tide, far from the ocean, far from her, somewhere he could think, somewhere her song couldn't reach him, or so he prayed. He returned to what fruit he had relied on, only to find them nearly picked clean, both above and below. What meager scraps he managed to salvage only sharpened his hunger. He moved along thin, winding trails, gathering what little remained of his prior traps. Most were scattered, splintered, wrecked as thoroughly as his raft. By noonday, his gnawing hunger forced him deeper into the island, into a part he had never explored. The rain thickened overhead, and the wind muttered through the leaves like a warning. From every direction, the world felt shaped by her mood. Might want to get rid of that line. It's a little too knowing. By noonday, his gnawing hunger forced him deeper into the island, into a part he had never explored. The rain thickened overhead, and the wind muttered through the leaves like a warning. When at last he returned to a central point, the site of his budding homestead, those few choice logs laid out like the bones of a future refuge, gave him a flicker of resolve. He pressed on, following the creek farther downstream than he had ever dared. He assumed it merely spilled out somewhere else along the beach. He was grateful to be wrong. The creek widened into a secluded pond, fed by twin waterfalls, their mist catching the sun in thin, shimmering veils. Thin, shimmering, rainbowed curtains. A thin, shimmering, rainbowed curtain. Caves ringed the water's edge. Dark mouths gaping beneath the overhangs. It was perfect. Shelter from the rain, a place for firelight to cling to stone. A retreat beyond the reach of the tide in her voice. But he was not the first to find it. Half buried in moss and sand lay broken pillars, carved with ancient runes Garrett didn't recognize, shapes like tangled currents, spirals, and hooked lines eroded by centuries. Whatever rite or gathering had once taken place here was long dead, swallowed by time. Still, the air felt thick with something unspoken, as though the stone itself remembered. See, I mentioned these pillars and ancient ruins, and then I never used them again. There's a lot of wasted stuff in this book. Like, I could definitely flesh it out, add a chapter here and there. I don't know, we'll see. Whatever rite or gathering had once taken place here was long dead, swallowed by time. Still the air felt thick with something unspoken, as though the stone itself remembered. And for a moment Garrett wondered if he had stumbled into a place meant to stay forgotten. The thought alone made it seem perfect for hiding. He returned to his familiar fishing spot and allowed himself a small, almost foolish smile as he bid it farewell. With as much lumber as he could shoulder, he trudged back toward the pond. clinging to the hope that he was leaving his bad luck behind him. I said him out of habit. His bad luck behind. Clinging to the hope that he was leaving his bad luck behind. Okay. By evening, he had rigged a crude doorway over the mouth of one of the larger caves and coaxed a small fire to light within. Its glow clung to the stone like a fragile promise, warmth, shelter, in the first place in days that he felt untouched by her. Despite his hunger, the warmth brought him a fragile comfort as he finally dried after such a long, dreadfully dreary day. But the night proved uneasy. He woke at every shift of wind, every drip of rain against stone, every rustle beyond the cave of the mouth. And once, half dreaming, half certain, he thought he heard the distant sound of a woman weeping, carried thin and mournful over the storm-laden air. He awoke still feeling like a barbarous madman, but a cool dip in the lake roused his reason and steadied his spirits. What relieved him most was finding a body of water that didn't trigger disappointment or fear. The water here was truly fresh, not salty, not brackish, and the chorus of frogs ringing the banks confirmed it. Today was another miserably overcast day, but the rain had weakened, leaving only a damp chill in the air. Catching several of the frogs proved difficult, but worth the effort. They offered a meager breakfast of much-needed meat. I don't know if I like the word meager here. A simple breakfast of much-needed meat, scarce though the portions were. Garrett spent the morning setting new traps along the embankments and the narrow trails threading through the undergrowth. Surely this place was frequented by the island's wildlife. Fresh water this clean was too precious to ignore. The fish here were easier prey as well, and by midday he had secured a proper meal using nothing more than a crudely fashioned spear. I did give him a spear. For the first time in days, a thin root of hope began to take hold of him. Though tangled with despair, this arrangement was fine for today, but he couldn't live like this forever. He would have to try to escape again if he ever wanted to return home. Home. He wasn't even sure where that was anymore. The shifting stars had stolen the sky's guidance from him, leaving him stranded, not just on the island, but the world itself. Not that it mattered on such a cloudy, dreary day. Garrett resolved to stay here at his new base camp to try and devise a plan. Every night, he seemed to be under a different sky, with the constellations driven away from their previous night's location. Not that it mattered on such a cloudy, dreary day. Garrett resolved to stay near his new base camp and try to devise a plan. One decision came easy. He would avoid the rocky outcropping along the shoreline. He wanted no risk of falling under the hypnotic suggestion. He wanted no risk of falling under another hypnotic suggestion. That was all the other night had been, wasn't it? That was all the incident had been, wasn't it? A trick of the siren's song. Just like the old tales, luring men off course, shattering ships upon rocks. But then, why had she left him unharmed? Why bring him food? The thoughts curled around him like tendrils, and shook his head sharply, refusing to follow them down whatever path they led. Dangerous thinking, foolish thinking. He busied himself with gathering wood for his shelter. The crude structure still felt exposed to the elements. The wind slipped through the gaps like probing fingers. Another wall, at least one more, would make it feel less like a temporary refuge, more like a place he might actually survive the night. Survive the night. When evening came, Garrett felt a rare flicker of pride as he watched the firelight dance across his newly constructed wall. Planks, still damp, the gaps stuffed with mud and tall grasses. Crude, yes, but it was shelter. Tall grasses. What the fuck? It's not... moss. Crude, yes, but it was shelter. His shelter. Something he had made with his own hands. For the first time in days, he felt a little more like a man and less like a cornered beast. Animal. A little more like a man and less like a cornered animal. Yet he hated, truly hated, that some stubborn part of him missed the lean-to on the warm sand. Missed the salt-washed breeze and the luxury of watching the sun sink beneath the waves each night. Missed the familiar rhythm of the tide and the strange, terrible comfort of knowing she was near. But here, in the shadow of stone and forest, he was no one's prey, no one's plaything. He fell asleep satisfied, with his work, with the fire's warmth, with the full meal settling in his belly. For the first time since arriving on the island, he let himself believe that tomorrow would be better, that his traps would be full, that the clouds would break and the sun would return. He drifted off, confident that he had finally taken a step out of her reach. Garrett awoke with a dull ache pulsing through every limb. His body felt heavy, unrested, as though sleep had done nothing but bruise him further. The light pressing against his eyelids was harsh, too bright, too direct. He lifted a hand to shield his face and pushed himself upright, planting his free palm on the ground for balance. Warm sand shifted beneath his fingers. Sand? The beach? A cold jolt ran straight through him. He cracked his eyes open and immediately regretted it. The sun glared down like a merciless, unblinking eye, stabbing through his skull. His wounds, still raw, still filled with grit, flared awake in protest. His thoughts staggered, sluggish and confused, like a drunkard still reeling from the night before. Blinking through the blur, his vision sharpened just enough to catch the shape he dreaded most. The rocks. There they sat, a little more than 50 feet off the shoreline, jagged, dark silhouettes rising from the sea like tribunal judges. The waves crashed against them in rolling bursts, each impact sounding horribly like laughter. Laughter at him. Laughter at his escape, undone. Beside him sat his loincloth and a length of rope to tie it with, laid out, folded for his convenience. Had he done this? Garrett stared at the rocks. His pulse quickened with a sick, sinking recognition. He didn't remember walking here. He didn't remember anything after drifting off by the fire. The memory should have been there, some trail, some stumble, some panic in the dark, but his mind offered only blankness. A cold thought crept in. Did I come here, or was I brought? The tide lapped higher around his ankles, colder than he remembered the sea ever being. He pushed himself up, the ache in his limbs worsening, as though he'd been carried a great distance or fought something in his sleep. Looking back across the dunes, he saw his own footprints, clear, damning evidence of self-betrayal. His stomach quivered, as though the frogs he'd eaten yesterday were still alive and kicking inside him. Had she come inland, dragging that massive shark half through the forest? Or had her song reached him even in his secluded cave? There were no furrows in the sand to suggest she'd crawled this far. Had he simply underestimated the reach of her influence? Let's see. Got it, full chapter review mode. I'll give you the holistic critique, then line by line level strengths, the structural and thematic notes, then actionable revision suggestions. No rewriting unless you ask. This is analysis. Damn straight. Overall impression. This chapter is emotionally violent, claustrophobic, and deeply internal, which suits the content. You're exploring trauma, shame, and dissolution of self, and the writing leans into fragmentation, sensory overload, and dissociation. This is absolutely working. Well, because I know dissociation very well. Your prose has sharpened. It's more precise, more confident, and more psychologically rich than earlier drafts. This chapter feels like a descent, each paragraph pulling the reader deeper into the protagonist's distorted self-perception. The main things to refine, occasional drift into abstraction that weakens the impact, a few unclear reference, who's thinking what and what the sensory detail is tied to, pacing hiccups where emotional beats could land harder with slight restructuring. A small risk of over-repetition with bodily shame imagery, powerful but needs modulation for maximum effect. I do tend to repeat stuff a lot in this tale. But overall, this is one of your tighter chapters. You're veering into a moral and spiritual horror vibe, and it's working. It's working extremely well, the immediate bodily recoil. His stomach clenched violently, a choking mix of shame and confusion flooded him. Strong visceral opening in medias of emotional break, the duality of violated and violator. This is excellent. It captures the self-loathing, the confusion, the moral conflict, and the blurring of perpetrator, victim, and trauma recollection. It's complex but instantly intuitive. Keep this proof carved across his skin. This metaphor does a ton of work across the chapter. It grounds the dissociation. It links memory to physicality. It creates a tactile anchor in a sea of internal chaos, the trembling. The short final line, he trembled, is effective. It is a pressure drop moment, the emotional version of a deflated lung. Ending a beat on a minimal sentence here is a good craftsmanship. Weakness and opportunities. Ambiguous timeline of memory. Is he remembering an abuse event, a violent act he committed, a mix of both? Right now the phrasing implies both, but the reader may need one more breadcrumb to orient themselves without removing the ambiguity you want. Occasionally telling language slips in. Shame and confusion are correct emotions but slightly clinical. Usually show emotion through sensory collapse and self-perception. Stick with that most of the time. The physical wound description could escalate more gradually, going from emotional shock, hand to chest. Fresh wounds is strong, but the chapter uses more gore, body detail later. You may want to stagger it in for rhythm. Fragmentation of memory could be even more fragmented. If this chapter follows another intense one, you could allow even more. Follows other intense ones, you could allow even more broken sentences, staggered thoughts, intrusive flash images, and synthetic confusion. Right now you're at 60% intensity. This chapter could push 80% and be unforgettable. Structure and flow. The emotional arc should feel like this. Physical shock, cognitive dissonance, sensory anchoring, dissociative recoil. The whole chapter mirrors or expands the cycle. If the whole chapter mirrors or expands the cycle, it will feel tight. If the chapter diverges, fights, confrontations, other characters, then this scene functions as an excellent hinge. If this is the chapter opener, it's a compelling hook. If it's mid-chapter, I'd advise a half beat of orientation for pacing. The duality tension is peak Jost-like thematically. Blame, inner violence, moral disgust, fractural identity, self-harm, or symbolic wounds, trauma flash mixed with guilt. This matches the overarching themes of your novel, the battle between what's divine, what's monstrous, and what's merely human. This scene tightly aligns with Jost's arc, if it's him. It's not Jost. If it's another character, it still resonates with your story's themes of internal contradiction and spiritual corrosion. He's got this, keeps mixing it up with another book that I'm working on. Actionable suggestions. Replace one abstract emotion with a concrete sensation. Instead of shame and confusion, consider a physical manifestation. Cold spreading down his spine, heat rising in his face, a nauseating lurch already hinted by stomach clenching, buzzing in the ears, pressure down the eyes. Concrete is better than a label. Clarify the origin of the wounds by 5%. Not explaining it is good, but give one more sensory clue to the reader so knows that they were carved recently during an event or discovered now like a mystery. Consider adding a microflash, just one intrusive image, a hand, teeth, a voice, a shadow, a specific color, something breaking. If you don't need full context, just a flash that intensifies the memory assault. Possibly break the paragraph. Emotionally potent, visceral, stylistically cohesive, only needs polishing, clarity in a couple places, and maybe a bit more sensory texture. If you'd like, I can highlight specific points to tighten out spans, suggest alternate phrases that preserve your voice, look at how the scene fits the chapter's thematic progression, help with pacing or narrative tension. Okay. A sudden crash of water behind him made him wheel around. The creature of his fears surfaced behind one of the rocks and slid atop with a languid grace. She smiled, waved even, with a shy yet arrogantly knowing curl of her fingers. Her eyes watched him with a proud hunger, as if she knew far too much about him. Garrett staggered back, disgust rising in his throat, rising hot in his throat. He didn't need memory to tell him what had happened last night. He could read it in her expression. Worse, he could feel it in the unearned ease humming through his body. Another dalliance with this devil of the deep. Another dalliance with this devil of the deep. I wrote that. That's good. Garrett staggered back. Garrett used his name quite a bit. I can just call him he in this part. Get myself one less Garrett on the pages. He staggered back, disgust rising hot in his throat. Garrett turned away, another dalliance with this devil of the deep. Garrett turned away, shaking his head as he walked. Behind him came a cry, raw, wounded, like some injured animal. I think I want to keep that, because I have him call himself an animal, refer to himself, think of himself as an animal at an early point, and now it's like he's kind of projected that onto her. I think that works as a nice callback to earlier in the chapter, a nice little bit of duality. One piercing, grief-stricken note, and then a splash. He risked a glance back. She was gone. Somehow that made the entire surface of the water more dangerous than before. Garrett ran. He sprinted. Garrett turned away, then Garrett ran. I do like that. That's a nice little callback from paragraph to paragraph. Normally I wouldn't want to start two paragraphs with the same word, but that works. He sprinted across the sand toward his first encampment. Heart pounding, breath tearing at his throat, but her voice pursued him, drifting in from some impossible distance over the waves. Would you really love me then leave me? Hold me then hide? What kind of cruel coward are you, shore walker? Arriving at his lean-to, he stopped short. It wasn't destroyed. Worse, it was tended. His firewood had been neatly stacked. A line of fish hung between two poles, drying in the sun. The lean-to itself had been reinforced, built up into something sturdier and draped in garlands of seaweed threaded with shells and starfish, a shrine, a plea, a trap dressed as tenderness. For a moment rage flared in him, urging his hands to tear it down, but the fury guttered just as quickly, smothered by some wretched, tangled feeling he couldn't name. Defeated by it, he slipped back into the forest. From the shoreline, the sound of weeping rose with the tide as the sky began to darken. Garrett burst through the trees at a new location, carving a wild path he'd never taken before. The creek or any water felt unsafe now. Right now. If she had swum inland once... If she had swum inland, swum. Is swum even a word? If she had swam inland once, who was to say she wasn't gliding silently through every stream, every pool, calling to him from beneath the surface? And the decorations on his shoreline shelter, were those an offering, an invitation, a lure? The thought made his skin crawl. He felt toyed with, managed, kept. By the time he stumbled into his new base camp, he was half sick with dread, braced for some proof she had found this refuge too. But everything was calm, untouched. His makeshift door, vines tugged into crude hinges, hung slightly ajar, just enough for him to slip through sideways, not nearly enough for a creature with a long, sweeping tail to force its way inside. For a heartbeat, he felt relief. Then it soured. His raft had been torn apart, his traps ruined, his body stolen in the night. But this place, this one place he had chosen, remained pristine, untouched. That almost made it worse. It meant the violation wasn't physical. It was him. He had left by his own will, a will he no longer trusted. Was this enchantment? It had to be. Nothing else could explain the longing rising in him now, the sudden pity for the sea creature he had fled from, the aching guilt for the way he left her crying in the surf. That couldn't be natural. This weakness couldn't be attraction. Garrett pressed his back to the cave wall and dragged both hands down his face, trying to scrape the fog from his thoughts. His memories of the night before slid through his mind like eels. Glimpses of moonlight, the taste of salt on his tongue, the warmth of a body he should have feared. None of it felt chosen. None of it felt like him. It was as though something inside him had been lifted gently from its place and rearranged, each piece angled toward her, and worst of all, he could feel that arrangement still, waiting. He curled forward, gripping his skull as if holding the pieces in place by sheer force. No more. He would not wake on that beach again. He would not be summoned in the night like some lovesick puppy. If she meant to rule his sleep, he would find a way to bar the door of his own mind. That night he fastened an extra cord around his doorway to bind it shut, another around his ankle to leash him to a large stone, and finally stuffed his ears with moss to keep her sad, seductive song from creeping into his brain. He kept the fire bright, perhaps larger than he should, and watched the night itself as a guardsman, while fighting sleep only to eventually betray himself yet again in yet another surrender. It's short, it's quick, it flows well, Chapter 4 kind of works. How long did it take me to get through? Not too long. I don't know if I've been streaming this. Only half an hour to get through. And it reads well. Okay. Yeah, I'm mad at that. Yeah, Chapter 4 came out pretty good. Alright, since that was only half an hour. Chapter 5. Now, I know Chapter 5 is a lot longer. Just saying it's only 7 pages, though. Yeah. Copy. Ugh. Give that a second and get the tea color going, because that was fantastic. That was a great cup of tea. We'll be back for the next chapter review. Edit. Who the fuck is trying to get a hold of me and why? kind of sort of starting a new job. I'm not really sure. It's an online sort of digital hype kind of thing. It's weird. I don't know if it's a real job or not yet. It was too easy to get into, and typically, if a job is too easy, it's usually a scam. So, we'll see. But my trainer is saying she just finished her workday and made $1,200 today. And then how much salary would you be satisfied within a day? $250. That would be satisfactory for me. It would be enough if I was doing that 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month. I could pay my bills, save, invest. There'd be plenty. Oh, this is a much smaller chapter than I thought. I thought this chapter went long. This is even shorter than the last one. Okay. Chapter 5. That night the wind shifted, just slightly, just enough for Garrett to wake in a different kind of haze the next morning. Smoke had filled his cave hovel so thoroughly that daylight streamed through it in swirling bars. His eyes burned as he blinked awake, and he coughed through a throat scraped raw by ash. Rising in alarm, he struck the back of his skull against the cave wall and lurched forward, nearly tearing down the supporting structure, remembering the latching he'd fastened the night before. He clawed at the extra cord until the door gave way. He stumbled out and fell hard on his face, tasting the moist dust of the pond bank. His ankle burned, his own betrayal. Gathering himself into a miserable heap, he unbound the vines tied around his leg, wincing at the red band that had seared into his skin during his frantic escape from the choking smoke. He felt foolish, but laughed it off with a shake of his head as he pulled the wads of moss from his ears. He looked over the now askew wall of sticks and leaves and was grateful none had burned outright. The fire had collapsed into a smoldering heap, still breathing out a thick, stubborn cloud of smoke, proof that a few embers clung to life within. He rose to tend the pile and winced again at the stab of his ankle. Rising. So using the noun-specific past tense, I can just turn that into a single action. Rising to tend the pile made him wince again. Made him wince again at the stab in his ankle. Perhaps he had twisted it into a light sprain. Perhaps it had been twisted into a light sprain. Perhaps it had been twisted into a light sprain. Each step mocked him with reminders of his own foolishness as he worked to quiet the smoke without killing the fire entirely. He was already too tired, too frustrated to face the chore of starting a new flame today. Let's see. Its brain, each step mocked him with reminders of his own foolishness as he worked to quiet the smoke without killing the fire entirely. He was already too tired, too frustrated to face the chore of starting a new flame today. He looked over the now askew wall of sticks and leaves. He checked his fishing supplies. His. Garrett checked over his fishing supplies, a few lengths of knotted cord and some makeshift hooks, only to find they'd been placed far too close to the flames. Garrett checked his fishing supplies, just a few lengths of knotted cord and some makeshift hooks, only to find they'd been placed far too close to the flames. They were charred, brittle, useless. In his obsession with protecting his chastity and his pride, he must have been careless with them. His stomach gnawed at him until his head spun, and his ankle throbbed so fiercely he felt helpless to do anything about it. Climbing fruit trees was out of the question, and even the idea of staggering from trap to trap in hopes of catching nothing felt like a cruel waste of what strength he had left. His pride had already been shattered that morning, so he swallowed what scraps remained and found himself, almost without meaning to, limping back toward the shore. He hated admitting he hated admitting even to himself that he was returning in the hopes of the mermaid's mercy. Praying she had left another meal. Praying she might have left another meal. It said had. It's probably what I want to be there then, for the sake of flow. Praying she had left another meal. With any luck, she'd abandoned a fresh bounty he could snatch quickly and humbly before slinking away again. Any luck, she'd abandoned a fresh bounty he could snatch quickly before slinking away again. I don't like the end humbly. Without encountering the lust-drunk siren who haunted his nights. No such luck. When he reached his first, now secondary campsite, there was no bounty waiting for him. The garlands of seaweed and shells had been ripped down, their remnants strewn across the sand like the aftermath of an argument he didn't remember having. Even the spot where her fish offerings usually lay was a chaos of torn weeds and broken shells. And yet, another cold, colorless morning, the sight felt especially harsh. On yet another cold, colorless morning, the sight felt especially harsh, especially personal, as though she hadn't merely withdrawn her kindness, but rejected him entirely. His stomach growled in despondency as his eyes lifted to the white-crested tide in self-pity and regret. The sight made his blood run cold. He jolted, then went utterly still. Embarrassment, shame, and a sick twist of fear washed through him all at once. There, half in the surf, her hands pressed to the wet sand, her bare chest lifted without a hint of modesty, lay the mermaid. She glowered at him with the solemnity of a judge and jury combined, disdain and longing braided together in her gaze. Set it together. I think I want through her gaze. She looked almost awkward this far out of the water, propped on her elbows like a creature caught between worlds, yet she carried herself with a strange regal poise, a dignity Garrett himself lacked as he limped toward the beach like a wounded animal. Again, animal. That's like the third time within like 5,000 words. wounded puppy. Forcing a smile. Excuse me. Forcing a smile that felt brittle on his lips, he raised a hand in greeting. "Good morning, miss," he managed, his words tumbling out too quickly. "I was hoping you might have left food for me." He hesitated, humiliation rising hot in his throat. "I assume it was you leaving the fish?" Another pause, his voice wavered. "I do appreciate it." A third, longer pause. "Thank you." She lifted her sharp, tapered chin and somehow, despite lying half submerged, despite being lower than him, managed to look down on him with withering judgment. Garrett felt her gaze scrape through him, cool and invasive. He opened his mouth to speak again, some apology, some plea, perhaps even a foolish instinct to approach her, when her voice cut through the air, icy, clear, beautiful in a way that melted straight through his spine. "You finally speak to me, lover, and it is only to beg like some octopus scrounging for scraps." Her words rang with cold music. Steady music, because I'm using cold and cool quite a bit. Her words rang with steady music. "I offered you gifts, my affection. You spurned them. You had come to me nightly to satisfy your desires without a single word. And now you show gratitude at last simply because you are hungry?" She hissed a breath through her teeth, the sound almost a broken note in a song. Pitiful, clumsy oaf. With that she turned, dragging herself toward deeper water. Clumsy in movement, yes, her tail. Awkward. See, that's what I thought. Double W's, which is really quadruple W. Awkward in movement, yes, her tail catching in the sand, her arms working awkwardly along the wet ground. Damn it! Oh, and cumbersome. Cumbersome in movement, yes. Cumbersome in movement, yes, her tail catching in the sand, her arms working awkwardly along the wet ground, but never once did she surrender her dignity. Even wounded, even furious, she carried herself like a queen retreating from an unworthy subject. "Wait," Garrett called, limping forward across the wet sand. She flicked her head toward him, her expression carved from disdain, but the moment her eyes took in his stagger, his struggle, her features softened. She paused, rolling onto her back and propping herself up on her elbows. Head tilted, she watched him, curiosity and concern threading through the crease of her brow. "How did you come to be injured, Shorewalker? Is this why you didn't come to me last night, my poor bumbling lover?" The word lover made him flinch. Disgust with himself twisted into anger, rising hot in his chest. "I injured myself resisting your enchantments, you siren," he spat, voice harsh with shame and defiance. She looked at him, shocked and dismayed. Enchantments? Her voice was sharp, incredulous, yet carried a melodic lilt that made him falter. "You come to me slack-jawed and dumb like some beast, and because I sing for my own amusement, you call me a siren?" Garrett felt heat rise in his cheeks, a mixture of shame and anger. You've ensnared me," he stammered. "I injured myself resisting you." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "Ensnared you? You enter my waters, my body, my song, how many times now, without even asking my name, and yet you have the gall to call me an enchantress? And you expect me to leave food for you like some careless fry?" Her tone dripped with contempt, yet something beneath it hummed with sharp amusement, a subtle pull he couldn't ignore. She rolled onto her back. I already have her onto her back. She rolled onto her front. She rolled onto her stomach. Propping herself on her elbows, watching him with a predator's grace and a tilt of curiosity. Garrett clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. I didn't come for food. Not just that. His voice faltered under the weight of her gaze, something in it making him feel small and exposed. I don't know why I came at all. She arched her eyebrow, lips curved ever so slightly. Ah, so the beast is finally honest, she said softly, almost singing the last word. Tell me, Shorewalker, is this truth or merely your pride bruised and your belly empty? Garrett gasped. Garrett gaped. His jaw hung as his mind flipped between anger and hunger, fear and desire. He limped a few steps closer, unsure whether he wanted to answer or a meal. Whether he wanted answers or a meal, or simply to stop feeling like a fool. I'm sorry I've been rude, he said, voice raw. But why save me just to toy with me and seduce me? Am I supposed to be your pet, your plaything? I disappointed you last night and now you won't feed me? What am I supposed to think when you cast some spell over me that makes me feel like I'm dreaming? Where I have no control when you're near? She blinked slowly as if dissecting each of his words. Then her lips curled. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. Lover, she breathed. Do you truly think I ensnare you? She shifted, propping herself up with effortless grace, even as her tail dragged awkwardly across the sand. She shifted, pulling herself closer. I sing because it is my nature. I am beautiful because it is my nature. I want, I hunger, I seek warmth because it is my nature. The sea made me this way. Her fingers traced her collarbone in an idle thought. When you hear my voice, your mind goes soft. When you see me, your blood heats. That is your nature. You are a man. You are not made of iron. She let the words hang, watching them sink into him. A faint, pleased glow touched her eyes, quietly flattered, not mocking. You think I bewitched you, she murmured, tilting her head, but perhaps you simply wanted me. Perhaps you came of your own will, again and again, because your body obeys the laws it was born under. A sly, dangerous smile followed, just as mine does. Garrett swallowed, caught between denial and the truth she laid bare. I don't, but she leaned forward, eyes bright with predatory affection. There is no villain here, Shorewalker. Only instinct, only want, only the sea's design and the land's. Her voice softened, unexpectedly tender. But now you insult me with talk of spells and trickery, as if you are a child who cannot be held responsible for his own longing. She paused after speaking of nature, his and hers, and something in her expression loosened, the anger slipping just a little. And still, she murmured, you think I toy with you. She lifted one hand from the sand and let water drip from her fingers, slow, thoughtful, not seductive, reflective. When you come to me dazed and burning, I think you are drawn. I think you are choosing me. I am flattered. Her voice dipped, almost shy. I thought you liked that you lost control. Garrett's breath hitched. The words struck deeper than he expected. It frightened me, he admitted. It still does. Her eyes softened in a way that made him feel briefly seen, completely, painfully. Then we are alike, she whispered, for you frighten me as well. That startled him almost more than her anger. She reached toward him, fingers brushing the seawater between them. Her gesture was tender, hesitant, nothing like the confident creature who scolded him moments before. When you come close, she said quietly, my heart beats too fast. My voice trembles. I feel warm. She gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. It is not magic. It is not enchantment. It is simply what you do to me. For a heartbeat, they stared at one another, the tension shifting, not vanishing, but forming into something new, something frightening for both of them. It could have mended everything, but Garrett's shame surged again, black and stubborn. His ankle throbbed, his stomach churned, his pride burned. You say that, Garrett growled, but then why destroy everything I built? Why make it impossible for me to survive without you? The moment shattered. She drew her hand back as if scalded. Garrett's shame curdled into anger. He limped closer, pointing at her with a trembling hand. He snapped. Explain the raft, the traps, all of it. You think I don't see what you've been doing? Every time I try to leave this cursed island, something destroys my work. My raft shattered, my traps ripped apart. Her brows rose in genuine confusion. You think I ruined your sticks and vines? Don't play innocent, Garrett barked. You dragged yourself inland to decorate my shelter like some lovesick spirit, but you can't bear the thought of me escaping, can you? So you smash what I build. Force me to depend on you. Keep me hungry enough to crawl back. His voice cracked again, cracked against the last word, exposing more of his fear than he wished. Something in her expression shifted. First bafflement, then a wounded understanding. The raft, she murmured. Yes, that one was mine. She didn't say it with pride. She said it like a confession pressed out of her. I saw you piling driftwood and rope, and I... She looked away toward the endless horizon. The sea is vast, lover. Cold, empty. I am alone in it. When I saw you building that thing, I thought... Her voice thinned. I thought that you would leave me. Garrett blinked, thrown by the nakedness of her tone. But the traps? He demanded, grasping for something solid. Did you destroy those too? She made a sharp, dismissive gesture. What traps? Why would I bother with such things? I haven't seen any such thing. Why would I bother with such things? I haven't seen any such thing. The forest is too dense and dry for me to wander in. Her tail slapped lightly against the surf. If they are broken, perhaps you are bad at making them. Her lack of guilt there seemed genuine, infuriatingly genuine. Seemed genuine. And infuriatingly dismissive. But she wasn't finished. And as for your raft, she said more firmly, I did not break it to punish you. I broke it because I wanted you to stay. I want you to love me. Her hands curled in the sand, embarrassed by the admission. What man could love a fish, he snapped. Hurt flickered across her features, sharp, unguarded, before freezing into cold fury. Again with the cold. I mean, it's freezing, so of course it's cold. So we can get rid of that. She twisted, dragging herself back into the surf, and disappeared for a heartbeat before resurfacing with a massive fish in both hands. With royal disdain, she hurled it at him, the motion effortless, a reminder of her strength. Love this, then, if this is what you think of me. It slapped at his feet, looking more shocked than he felt. Garrett stood deflated, stunned, furious, ashamed, everything at once. as she watched him with that impossible mixture of longing and contempt. Their fight hung suspended between them, unresolved, unended, the natural storm of two creatures who had never meant to meet at all. He lifted his head to thank her, but she had already flipped away into the deep and vanished. Garrett bent, picked up what he'd come for, the victory hollow in his hands. He made a small fire in the sand and cooked the fish staring out over the churning surf. Every wave seemed to echo the ghost of her voice. To his own frustration, he found himself wishing she would return, if only to scold him again. Their exchange had awakened something that he had nearly forgotten, the desire for companionship, for another voice in this silent world. Only now did Garrett realize how forsaken he was on this lonely island. Oh, and there I put in like the name of the book, except on this lonely isle. Let's call it The Lonely Isle. So below is a full chapter critique of your chapter 5. I'm treating it like a developmental editor would. Structure, emotional continuity, character logic, pacing, prose, and thematic clarity. I'll break it into sections for ease of use. If you want, I can then give you Chapter 5, developmental review, overall impression. This chapter is excellent in terms of emotional tension, atmosphere, and character conflict. The strongest aspects are the psychological complexity of the mermaid, proud, lonely, instinct-driven, insecure. Garrett's internal contradictions, his shame, hunger, anger, and desire all colliding. The dialogue, which is lyrical without being purple. The theme, instinct, not enchantment, is powerful, reframing the entire relationship. The chapter is doing a lot, progressing the relationship, delivering a major confrontation, revealing the mermaid's emotional vulnerability, revealing Garrett's self-deception, showing the island as a character, deepening the question of who was actually the threat. It lands, but some tightening could elevate it further. Structure and pacing. The chapter has a clean 3-act shape. Garrett suffers, hunger, injury, shame, and returns to shore. The confrontation with the mermaid, emotional, escalating, and revelatory. Aftermath, loneliness returns, but deeper than before. The structure is strong. The opening scene in the cave is slightly long for what it accomplishes. It's rich, but the smoke, ankle, moss, charred cores, the accumulation of micro-events slightly delays the core scene. Yeah. The confrontation beats as fantastic, but you could trim certain repetitions of Garrett's self-shaming or her "why would I do that" rebuttals without losing force. The ending is strong, but could be more thematically sharp. Overall pacing, 85% perfect, needs a little tightening, themes and character logic. Garrett, he is written very consistently. Shame, hunger, pride, desire, fear, anger. He cycles through these like a traumatized animal, perfect for the kind of psychological abuse and self-conflict you're exploring. His accusation that she is enchanting him the moment works because it reveals his need to believe he has no agency. That's rich character work. Thank you. The mermaid. Her portrayal is beautiful, proud but insecure, lonely but fierce, overwhelming but tender, predatory yet emotionally clumsy. Her confession about the raft is heartbreaking and perfectly in character. The conflict. The emotional logic is internally consistent. Her motivations are instinct and loneliness. Garrett's motivations are fear of desire, fear of dependence, hunger, shame. They misunderstand each other in ways that feel organic, not contrived. Very well done. Prose analysis. Strength. Strong sensory atmosphere. Smoke, surf, ash, cold water. Emotional clarity under emotional chaos. Vivid physicality. Limping, crawling, the way she drags herself awkwardly on land. The dialogue is excellent, mythic but natural. The mermaid's voice feels alien without being incomprehensible. Areas to refine. Sentence density and length. Many sentences are long, ornate, or stacked with clauses. That's your style, and it suits the mythic tone, but you may want to vary more often to create impact, especially in heated confrontations. Says the same thing twice moments. There are a few places where the emotion is repeated in slightly different words, and trimming one of the lines could sharpen the moment. Occasional modern phrasing examples. Clumsy oaf is fine. Bad at making them feels too modern compared to our other lines. Okay. What am I supposed to think feels contemporary? Not bad, just worth smoothing. Repeated emotional language. Garrett cycles through shame, fear, and anger a lot. Sometimes explicitly stated, let the physical reactions do more work. Bad at making them. for a poor craftsman. Scene by scene notes. Opening cave. Strong imagery might be trimmed 10 to 15%. His injury being self-inflicted supports your theme. He is the cause of half of his suffering. Returning to the shore, great emotional build-up. You frame it like he's going to his ex's house after a fight. The mermaid's entrance, perfect. Her posture, her awkwardness on land mixed with regal disdain, cinematic. Their first exchange, the section sings especially. You finally speak to me and is only to beg. Strong emotional accusations with mythic rhythm. Her calling him lover, excellent, loaded, not romantic, possessive, instinctual, embarrassed. The conversation about enchantment, one of the highlights of the chapter. Her line, perhaps you simply wanted me, is brutally perfect. The vulnerability moment, this is the emotional center. When you are come close, my heart beats too fast, my voice trembles. This is where the whole dynamic changes and becomes real. Garrett's accusation about the rafts and the traps. The section is fantastic, but slightly long. 15 to 20% trimming would make it hit harder. Her confession, I thought you would leave me, is devastating in exactly the right way. The fish throwing, excellent balance of comedy, pain, and insult. It's bitterly funny without breaking tone. Yeah. Ending, strong but could be sharpened. You have every wave seem to echo the ghost of her voice. Beautiful, and only now did Garrett realize just how forsaken he was. This feels like the correct emotional endpoint, but the final sentence might be strengthened by connecting it more explicitly to the relationship. Something like, he had never felt more alone now that he knew he wasn't the only lonely creature on this island. Something that ties their parallel loneliness together. I like that. I do like that, damn it. Shit. That's good. That is good. That's good. But do I want to add it or replace the one that I have? I think I want to replace the one I have. Summary of revision. Trim the early cave smoke sequence by 15%. Some dialogue repetition in the accusations. Occasional redundant emotional beats. Shame surged again. Pride burned. Yeah. Sharpen into the stronger thematic punch. Smooth, modern-sounding dialogue for the mermaid. Highlight her fear of abandonment earlier for foreshadowing Garrett's realization that she feels the same vulnerability he does. Okay. I'm going to call that. Hey, what's up, Artemis? How you doing? I'm going to go with that. And an hour and 12 minutes in. Well, 13 now. Okay. That's decent work for today. We got chapter 5 edited and done. Streaming for a little over an hour. I really need to make dinner. Alright. Pretty good. Pretty good. I'm actually just ending this stream. Caught me doing some editing. Got to chapter 5. I only got 16 in this whole thing. It's a very small novella. I just use Twitch here in order to actually get me to work and keep me from being distracted. So, thanks for popping in. It's mine. I wrote it in November over a course of about 2 weeks. Got the draft done. Now I'm just doing the fine-tuning. Yeah, that'd be cool. Planning on being back on again tomorrow. Would like to get this finished and edited this week. And this is day number 2 of the edits. So, yeah, I'll be back on mañana. Thanks for popping in. Have a great evening. Stop that.